Hello everybody, my name is Erin Goldschrafe, and I will be covering the sociological novel called Bright-Sided, How Positive Thinking is Undermining America by Barbara Ehrenreich. In the background, I am creating a makeup look inspired by the message I found the book to give. For now, I will discuss Ehrenreich as a person. After that, I will talk about the novel, how other reviewers perceive the book, how the novel pertains to sociology, show you photos and other sources I found to be intriguing, and my opinion regarding the topic at hand. Barbara Ehrenreich was born in 1941 and has since authored and co-authored a plethora of books. These books include Nickel and Dimed, Bait and Switch, and most recently, Natural Causes, among others. The grand total thus far of how many books she has written is 22. Aside from these books, her writing has been featured in Harper's Magazine, The New York Times, Time Magazine, The Progressive, and other media. Before her writing career, she was attending Rockefeller University. She eventually received her PhD in cellular biology. She then began teaching at the State University of New York at Old Westbury. During this time, the catalyst of her interest in sociology occurred. With the birth of her first child, she had a challenging time medically and socially. She notes this is what caused her to be a part of, and I quote, the women's health movement, advocating for better health for women and greater access to health information than they had at that time. With that experience, in combination with her being just born prior to the baby generation and obtaining a scientific background, she's been able to view society go through many changes, such as evolutions in medicine, technologies, trends, and mindsets. If you would like to read more about Barbara Ehrenreich's past, you can visit her website at barbaraehrenreich.com. Here is a photo of her. Now that you have seen the completed makeup look, I can show you why I was inspired to create that style in particular. The general idea of the book discusses Ehrenreich's experience with the burden of thinking positively. The beginning of the novel shows her experience with receiving a cancer diagnosis. She came to a realization that she was far too optimistic about medical treatment and life in general. Moreover, she realized how counterintuitive it is to receive the treatments and maintain the upkeep of her health. In fact, she labeled this relentless forcing of optimism, particularly regarding cancer, as a second disease. Moreover, in the second chapter, she discusses how the idea of being positive is not always completely voluntary. To elaborate, there are many websites that say a positive mindset is the key to your success. A particular example that Ehrenreich uses is a weight loss website telling you that the first step to weight loss is having a positive mindset. In fact, this optimism regarding others and their successes too is comparable to a prayer for them, in her eyes. Generally, a positive attitude is viewed as a cure for all of life's ups and downs. After the discussion of involuntary optimism, Ehrenreich reviews the history of such mindsets. Protestantism, especially Calvinism, was brought to New England by white settlers. This caused a state of religious depression. Because of the toxicity that religion brought in terms of mindset, the people participated in the New Thought movement. This, in Ehrenreich's words, drew from many sources: the transcendentalism of Europe, European mystical currents like Swedenborgianism, even a dash of Hinduism, and it seemed almost designed as a rebuke to the Calvinism many of its adherents had been terrified by as children. Essentially, this was trying to get God to seem less evil. During this time, however, illness was common. Neurasthenia, in particular, was common. The symptoms of this illness resemble chronic fatigue syndrome. Although rarely fatal, this caused more of an uproar regarding mindset. In the next couple of chapters, Ehrenreich describes business, motivation, and religion. She believes that corporations are evil. They hold a lot of power, and they control business as a whole. Moreover, the amount of layoffs she believes is toxic, and their existence is as well. These in combination provide a detrimental scene. In terms of religion, Ehrenreich believes that the Calvinist God and religion had some valuable points to it. Essentially, the religion discussed how bad things happening to people would make them grow and succeed. She believes this has some value to it, but it needs to be taken essentially with a grain of salt. In the next couple of chapters, Ehrenreich discusses positive psychology and optimism's effect on the economy. A prominent source of positive psychology is self-help books. She notes that happiness basically sells itself in this regard. An example of an author she notes is writing a notable self-help book is Martin Seligman. She says that his views are that happiness equates to the combination of your set range, the circumstances you're in, and factors under your voluntary control. Another quote she discusses is how Seligman believes happiness is more than pleasant, it is beneficial. As for the economy and how it's impacted by the optimism, she asked the rhetorical question, what is a recession anyway but a mass outbreak of pessimism? In the final chapter of Bright-Sided, Erin Goldschrafe basically discusses the entire message of the book. She notes how the words good and positive are used interchangeably and there are pros and cons to it. Furthermore, she discusses how a negative mindset is just as delusional as a positive one. In this sense, she's just striving for realism and balance. Another thing she notes is how our moods affect our perceptions, and the people we surround ourselves with, their moods also affect our perception. Now that you know about the book itself, I will discuss how other people interpreted the information given in the novel. For the most part, reviews of Bright-Sided are positive, which is sort of ironic. One positive review was given by Barbara Blondeau from the Canadian Women's Studies. The reviewer notes that although the general idea of the book is relatively not a new thought, the way Erin Goldschrafe composed her argument allowed for the information to reach a wider audience. Furthermore, it is likely that many people have seen and read self-help books. However, they may not have been exposed to the roots of such optimism and why it may not be healthy. Blondeau's stance on the novel is that it, verbatim, provides a viable and politically astute alternative to the promise of positive thinking. Another positive review was written by Khalifa Sine in an article called Power Lines. The author was comparing Bright-Sided to The Power by Rhonda Byrne. The topics discussed in the latter book are directly opposed to Erin Goldschrafe's views. Sine believes that Erin Goldschrafe proposed a powerful argument with strong refuting points against its competitor. On a not so positive side, James Surowiecki offered a middle-of-the-road, leaning negative review. Like Sine, he was comparing Bright-Sided to another novel in opposition. In this case, that novel was Sonic Boom, Globalization at Match Speed by Greg Easterbrook. To quote, he said that her targets are so obvious and self-indicting, Erin Goldschrafe's cultural analysis is often less illuminating here than in her early work, like The Hearts of Men. He further elaborates about the potentially questionable thesis and the lack of references used. Basically, he feels that she had more potential since her earlier works had more structural integrity and that it was not necessarily her place to give the information. Now that the author, the book's storyline, and professional reviews have been discussed, it is time to analyze the message through a sociological lens. The sociological theory that I find to be most applicable to discussing the topic of relentless optimism is the structural functional theory, also known as functionalism. Functionalism is a macro-level theory that revolves around society being the structure meeting individuals' necessities. Our textbook discusses that there are many attributes that contribute to society, such as social institutions and social facts. In our modern-day society, these contribute to the idea that being positive is the key to success. Through the functionalist perspective, individuals being positive and being successful help society maintain dynamic equilibrium. Without optimism in this sense, society would also plummet with the pessimistic mindset. As noted earlier, the general argument does not include entirely innovative ideas. Therefore, there are outside sources that discuss traits that Erin Goldschrafe noted. For example, in the book, Erin Goldschrafe begins her story by describing her experience with cancer. She felt that there were many flaws in how she was being treated, ranging from the feminization of pink ribbons to the pushing of being too optimistic. The American Cancer Society discussed optimism in their article called Attitudes in Cancer. They say that keeping such a positive attitude about cancer is not realistic and that the negative emotions are a part of the process of grieving. It is further elaborated that not allowing yourself to experience these negative emotions is isolating and potentially will result in more emotional turmoil. Another source I found about cancer and the optimism around it is a blog called Adventures in Living Terminally Optimistic by Tom Marzulay. This blog revolves around his incurable cancer diagnosis and staying optimistic about it. In his post, "So this is what cancer feels like," he says that cancer feels like finding ways to survive the tough times and retaining hope that one way or another, a path forward will be found to bring improved health, peace, and comfort to both you and your family. Contrasting to Erin Goldschrafe's stance on being too optimistic about cancer, Marzulay is proudly optimistic. In fact, as the blog title says, he considers himself terminally optimistic. In his posts, he accepts the negative aspects but also retains rational optimism. On the topic of rational optimism, Clifford and Lazarus discusses rationality compared to blinding optimism in a Psychology Today article called Why Optimism Can Be Bad for Your Mental Health. Those who are blindly optimistic, which are what many self-help books push, usually wind up with bigger problems. On the other hand, those who are rationally optimistic, I quote, do not talk about how wonderful things are, how terrific everything will turn out when faced with genuinely bad or unfortunate events. This mindset allows them to process negative information, unlike overly optimistic people, and move on. When someone is toxically optimistic, they often wind up being isolated because those around them cannot express their negative emotions. Furthermore, Roberto A. Ferdman's article in the Washington Post called Researchers Have Found a Really Good Reason Not to Be an Optimist also discusses optimism versus realism. Essentially, the article views how people are taught that to be successful, they must be optimistic. However, according to the study discussed, there is evidence that says otherwise. Ultimately, being realistic is correlated to success, as opposed to optimism. For being overly optimistic in general, a YouTube channel called Braincraft discussed how individual differences cause people to react differently to self-help books and sayings in their video titled The Negative Side of Positive Thinking. They cited many studies that support that, depending on one's self-esteem, their response will vary. According to their research, a person with low self-esteem saying seemingly positive phrases like, "I'm a lovable person," cause them to feel even worse about themselves. Conversely, those with higher self-esteem only felt moderately better. Here's a clip from their video.
Of course, our individual differences mean we respond differently to self-help techniques. Overall, researchers do suggest using more directed affirmations, saying, "I select good gifts for people," rather than "I'm a generous person." And these positive statements kind of suggest we should only think positive thoughts. Don't ruminate on the bad stuff, but consider that the occasional negative thought could be motivational too.
If you would like to see the rest of their video, I will include a link in the discussion post as well as at the end of the presentation. To conclude, I would like to express my own opinion on the matter. At the beginning of the semester when we were choosing our books to review, Right-Sided stuck out to me because I have also questioned the healthiness of relentless optimism. As someone who has been diagnosed with major depressive disorder and anxiety disorders, I have had a similar experience, medically and socially, that Erin endured. Everyone, especially those who are not experienced directly or professionally, just told me to be happy. The idea of relentless optimism was pushed on me as well. Furthermore, as someone who is on a psychology pathway to a neuroscience major, I plan to be a part of the healthcare field. Erin stories of how the healthcare field changed her mindset fascinated me on both a personal level and a future professional level. Generally, I agree with her stance on how being overly optimistic is toxic. Of course, anything that is overly anything is inherently too much, but in the grand scheme of things, the point where optimism becomes too much is subjective. I hope you were able to sufficiently gather information about Bright-Sided, How Positive Thinking is Undermining America by Barbara Ehrenreich. Now that you know all this information, here's the makeup look again. On one side of my face, I am portraying optimism, and on the other side, I am portraying what would happen when you're overly optimistic. Notice that it's more dark and gloomy on that side. Thank you for watching. Any links will be provided in the discussion post as well as in the next couple of slides.